I'd like to talk about for a few minutes is Active Directory, managing Active Directory. His introduction to Active Directory and account management. Nothing really mystical about this. The point that, and everybody listen to me or it's not going to work, the key to making Active Directory work is DNS. When you install Active Directory on your own server, in your NIC, the easiest way to configure your DNS is to point it to 127.0.0.1. Look at your own DNS server. The DNS objects in Active Directory are stored in Active Directory and populated into DNS. If you're going to join a domain, which you did, you have to use the DNS server on the machine that has Active Directory on it. It has to be able to find the service record, the SRV record. Well, it has to be able to find the IP address using the fully qualified domain name of that domain. If you're looking for a domain controller, then it's going to go look for a domain controller record at that IP address. If it can't find it, it just says, it tells you it can't find it, can't find that. But DNS is the absolute critical component of Active Directory. If DNS doesn't work, if you kind of blow it off, don't really pay attention to what's going on with DNS, it's not going to work. And I've seen that happen over and over again. This one is Active Directory basic concepts. Install and configure Active Directory. They're going to take you through the steps. Nothing difficult about doing it as long as DNS is functioning properly. And when you install Active Directory, if DNS isn't installed on your server, it'll go ahead and put it on for you. It's one of those that'll say, oh, I need this service in order to do that, or this role, and it'll add the role for you. So you don't have to add it in advance. Plan and implement Active Directory containers. Active Directory containers are going to be called OUs. A container is someplace where we put objects. We have the containers, the objects, the OUs, in order to put users together to be able to apply policies to them. Create, manage user accounts, and configure and use security groups. Security groups are two types of groups that are available, and they don't really address the other type, are security groups and distribution groups. Security groups can be assigned permissions to resources. Distribution groups can only be used to send emails. You can email, you can use security groups as email distribution groups. You cannot ever assign permissions to distribution groups. Delegate object management. This is one of those that if you have the 1,000 users, how many passwords you're going to have to reset a day? You may want to delegate that authority to somebody, and there's a delegation of authority wizard. One of the things that there is not is an undelegation authority wizard, which means that once you give it, you've got to go into the objects to take it back. This is an area of delegation, I think, that groups work very well in. So that if you wanted to delegate the reset password authority, let's say to the librarian over here, and the librarian left, if we had delegated it to his individual account, we'd have to go to his individual account and take it out if we didn't want him to reset passwords anymore. If we delegated it to a group and we wanted somebody to be in that group, we put them in that group. We don't do it anymore, we just take them out of the group. You don't have to worry about going into the details of the user objects in order to take that permission away. And you can delegate to individuals or to groups. Describe and implement the new Active Directory features. There are more policies in this than there were in 2003. The actual features, well, there are some new ones. It is, again, like all of the other ones. 2000, Windows Server 2000 was the first one that had Active Directory. It's gotten better with each iteration. So Active Directory basics. Active Directory is a directory service that allows you to find stuff. It allows you to find resources. It allows you to find yourself. It allows you to be authenticated. Active Directory can do a lot of stuff for us. It authenticates us. It can distribute software. Heck, we can even install the operating system using Active Directory, using the PXE, using the Windows Windows deployment server, because when you do that lab, you have to be a member of the domain. You have to be in Active Directory in order for that to work. Houses information about network resources, servers, printers, user accounts, group accounts. What it basically does, is takes the users that are on the standalone machines or in the registry and the SAM and stores them, houses them in a central database. It has to be installed on a server. You can have multiple servers, and in fact you should have at least two. In case one of them crashes, the other one takes control. We just talked about backups, and yeah, you should back up Active Directory, but if you have a situation that you have servers that have the database and one of them crashes, the other one still has the database. The way you can get it on another server is just join it to Active Directory. It'll then transfer that database. That's one of the things that we do have. We have two servers here, one in Virginia Beach, so that if something happens to our servers, how can we get the data back? Join it back to the domain. It will send all that information back to you. If you have 4 or 5 or 20 or 30 users and objects, not a big deal, but if you have 10,000 users, go back and make all of those user objects over. Probably not something that you want to do. Plus the fact that you lose the ability to authenticate when the database is down. So the recommendation always is that you have at least 2 domain controllers. The domain controllers are the servers that use the Active Directory service role. The server role is installed, the service is installed. You should install the service before the role, before you actually install Active Directory, the binaries. If you don't, if you just start installing it, it will install them for you. The way that you start the Active Directory wizard is with the DC promo command. You put Active Directory on and you take Active Directory off with the same command, DC promo. DNS, DNS, DNS. DNS really is important. Member servers don't have Active Directory installed. You already have done or will do that in order to do the Chapter 2 labs. The key to making that work is having the correct DNS server and the IP address of the domain controllers in the lab sheet. What you have to do is put it into the DNS server that you're going to use. Then it'll be able to find the domain controller, be able to join the domain. Administrator, capital P, password 1 for that one. Domain, fundamental component, holds the information about the network resources that are grouped within. Domain is generally considered a security boundary. A domain up until Server 2008 was an area that had a single security policy. How long can you keep your passwords? Complex passwords. How many characters in the passwords? You can configure Server 2008 to have different security policies for different organizational units, which is one of those container objects that they're starting at. But the domain is the starting point for policies. Roanoke is its own domain. Roanoke is a child domain of ECPIVAB. That's why it's whatever your username at roanoke.ecpivab.edu. All of the stuff is there. ECPIVAB.edu cannot send policies to us. So policies start at the domain level. Security policies, you can only have one security policy per domain until we get to Server 2008. They can be configured. It's not an inconsequential task in order to do that. Each DC is equal to every other DC, and this DC is not domain controller but domain component. Each domain is equivalent to every other domain. Chris is the administrator of the Roanoke domain. Somebody else is the administrator of the Greensboro domain. Somebody else the Raleigh domain. They are essentially autonomous. The reason that the child domains is replication. We replicate all of the user objects to Virginia Beach, and then they replicate all of them back. So that if somebody from Roanoke, let's do that because we go to the conferences up there occasionally. Somebody from Roanoke goes to Virginia Beach, we can log on to the network by simply telling it that we're in the Roanoke domain. It also makes the logon for Moodle work. Moodle is configured to use an LDAP server. The LDAP server it's configured to use is Active Directory. The server that is at Virginia Beach, it has all of the information for all of the user objects in it. And what it does is just simply starts and goes down the entire Active Directory until it finds your user object and then checks to see if you're you and if your password's correct. Now, that's a simplistic way, but that's the way that it works. That's why you can use your Active Directory credentials in Moodle, and you don't have to have a separate username with separate credentials in order to do that. Multi-master replication, advantage if one DC goes down, no network interruption. In the days before Active Directory, which would be NT 4.0 and NT 3.5, we had domain controllers called primary domain controllers and backup domain controllers. Primary domain controllers had read-write copies of the database. You could make changes. You could add users. You could reset passwords. And then we had backup domain controllers, which were used simply to authenticate you to the network. Those had read-only copies of the database on them. You couldn't make changes. So that if your primary domain controller went down, guess what? You can't do anything. You can't change passwords. You can't add users because your only read-write copy is down. Multi-master replication says that we can make changes to the database on any domain controller. And then there's a pretty big system set up so that they do a comparison of the times and who made what change when, so that the databases all have the same information. If I have 3 domain controllers and I make a user John on a domain controller, that same user John is on all the domain controllers because they share a database. They're not individuals. When you make a change on one domain controller, you make a change on all domain controllers. The installation window, the Active Directory domain services, you have to add that, and the activity is to install Active Directory. I always, I think it will configure you use 127.0.0.1 if you don't configure anything. I always go ahead and set my DNS in as 127.0.0.1. Advantage is if I change the IP address of the server, Active Directory can still find itself. I don't have to worry about the DNS server on that particular machine. The schema, the objects, there is one schema manager in a forest. Some other terms that they haven't introduced yet. A forest is the starting point. And inside the forest, we're going to have trees. We can have contiguous trees and non-contiguous trees. Contiguous trees are all of the ECPI VAB places, Roanoke and Greensboro and Raleigh and Beach, and all those are all part of the tree, part of the forest. If we then wanted to put MCI into a situation so that all of the domains trusted each other, and that's what a forest is all about, is all of the domains in a forest trust each other, we could put maybe MCI in the same forest. We would create a new domain in an existing forest so that we had trusts between everybody. We have trust, and the trust, what the trust means, that is if in a child domain here that the people at Virginia Beach can allow me to use a resource, can put me as a user on a printer, for instance, or we can put somebody at Virginia Beach as a user on a printer. Or we can put somebody at Virginia Beach, the network administrator up there, who has a username in the Beach domain. We can put him into a group and allow him to get on our virtual machines here to look at our virtual server so he can see what's going on. Can kind of have oversight of that. So that's what the trust, the forest, have trees in the trust. We're going to have forests, trees within the forest, and all of the domains within a forest trust each other, which means that you can allow somebody else to use your resources. It doesn't mean that they can just go do it. Simple schema for the user accounts includes a globally unique identifier. And it's a very long number that you occasionally see when you look at these things, when you're given permissions, and they don't quite get the object type overlaid. If you see an S something, another very large number there, that is the globally unique identifier. That is the SID. computers use numbers. The numbers, the schema, the user account, the view IDs, the numbers are all associated with objects, and that's what the system uses itself. Each attribute is automatically given a version number and date when it's created. What this is saying is the replication, if James makes a change on one domain controller and Trevor makes it on another domain controller, we do replication comparison based upon the attribute. So that if Trevor changes the phone number and James changes the address, they just change. We don't have to worry about that. But if both of them change the phone number, the basic thing that happens is whoever made the last change is the one that's going to stick. Active Directory is not instantaneous. Replication is not instantaneous. It can take some time. When I do the Active Directory class, I always get anxious and I get worried, and then if you just leave it, it fixes itself. The first time that we installed an Active Directory here, Buddy Chu and I did it, it got all messed up. We were doing this, we were doing that, and nothing seemed to be working as fast as we thought it should anyway. So we finally just gave up, left the server on, went home, came back the next morning, and everything was as it should be. Active Directory is something that may take some time. Don't get too anxious about it. Give it some time to see if it does it. The thing that you should check and should think through is what's providing, where's DNS being provided from? Because DNS is going to be the key. How can you find out? What I'd like to do is try to think about myself as the little whoever's trying to go somewhere and put myself in the network. Where am I getting this information from? And if I'm getting it from there, does that server actually have that information? The other real quick way is, can you ping the domain name? If you can ping the domain name, that means that you can find the domain name. Sometimes you'll use the NetBIOS name and it'll work just fine, and then you'll have to use the fully qualified domain name and it doesn't work. If Active Directory can't find the resource using the fully qualified domain name, not the NetBIOS name, it's not going to work. Got to be able to find the FQDN. Global Catalog stores information about every object in the forest. By default, you get one global catalog. The first server installed in the domain in the forest is going to be an everything server. It's going to be the root server. It's going to have the global catalog. It has, and it says information. It has some information about every object, not all the information. The domain controller is going to have all the information. What this really becomes is a referral service that if you need to go to another domain, you go to global catalog and it tells you which domain controller to go to get the information about those objects. The first one becomes a global catalog, and to make a new one, you just go into sites and services, and we'll see those as we go on, and tell it which server you want to be. You can make other servers global catalogs. And if you have multiple sites, multiple physical locations, you should have a global catalog at every site so that you can get those information. Its purpose: authentication, forest-wide searches, replication of free elements, keeps a copy of the most used attributes for quick access of the individual objects. Forest-wide searches: if we at Roanoke need to find an object at Greensboro, it's probably not going to be listed in our Active Directory because we only list our own domain. What the global catalog would have is the information as to where we would have to go to get the Greensboro information. Tell us which domain controller that we would go to. Namespace, name resolution. Here it is, and they just kind of stick it in name resolution. Don't say converts computer name, domain names to IP addresses. Well, that's a pretty simplistic way of saying that, right? Logical area network that contains directory services has the ability to perform name resolution. Contiguous namespace: every child object contains the name of the parent object. Contiguous: roanoke.ecpivab.edu, raleigh.ecpivab.edu. those things. Just join the namespace, ECPI, VAB, EDU, and maybe ADI.edu if we did the medical or whatever we wanted to put in there, or whatever the diesel school is, can all be in the same forest, which means that they can all share resources. But what it hasn't said, tree-like structure, containers, forest, trees, domains, I want to go back to that. What it didn't say in the namespace and the looking up and the DNS is, if you don't have it configured right, it's not going to work. Trust me, if you don't have it configured right, it's not going to work. You can have the most powerful server in the world. If it can't find itself, it's not going to work. If you should happen to install it and it doesn't put your domain in, just go into DNS and add the domain. You may have to reboot the server for all of the Active Directory objects to show up, but they will. But we have the containers, the forest, trees, domains, organizational units, and sites. The forest is the largest of the spaces that we use in here. Inside the forest we can have trees, contiguous tree over here, tree, domain, separated, and then discontiguous trees, some other name, ECPI, VAB, EDU, Microsoft.com, whatever, in these things. What does that mean? That if I am here down in one of these other domains, I can let, in the ECPI, VAB, I can let somebody in the Microsoft domain use resources, get to files, use a printer, whatever you want to do. I know those are simplistic ways to do that, but that's what they do. Domains, security boundaries. We start the management at the domain. Somebody makes a change at the Virginia Beach domain, it has no effect on the Roanoke domain. Somebody makes a change at the ECPI VAB root, has no effect on Roanoke. Nothing is inherited into a domain. Domain, the starting point. Organizational units are container objects. Container objects have what's called leaf objects. Leaf objects represent real resources like you, me, printers, computers, those things. Real stuff that you can reach out and touch are leaf objects. So the OU allows us to apply policies. Here you need certain things to do your job. We need certain things. The faculty does. The admin needs certain things. Different policies apply to different groups based on the organizational unit that they're in. When you apply a policy, by default it's going to apply to all of the objects in that OU. And only in that OU and any child OUs, because everything's inherited. If we apply a policy at the domain, it's going to be inherited by all of the organizational units in the domain. So we make a policy that says you have to change your password every 180 days. It's got to be 5 characters long and whatever else. You've got to keep it 10 days. We apply that policy at the domain, Roanoke. The OU students inherits that policy. So you have to change your password every 180 days. It has to be 5 characters long, and you have to keep it for 10 days after you change it. And, oh yeah, you get 5, whatever, 3 or whatever. It's got to be unique every 3 or 5, whatever it is times. The OU that I'm in, the faculty OU, inherits that policy. I have to change my password every 180 days. Got to be 5 characters long. Complex requirement, all those things. If I were in a different domain, wouldn't make any difference. So they inherit the policies. If I give you, in the students OU, the authority to install Wireshark through the add remove programs, it applies to you in the students OU. I don't get it. I'm in a different OU. I can link it to that OU, but it applies only to the users where that policy is implemented.
So basically, a domain is a series of security principles.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's generally what they talk about. It's a security boundary. Yeah. When you log into the domain. You get the authorities given to you in the domain. Now, we can do other things in the OUs. The OUs, the organizational units where we put the user objects, are really there for administrative control so that we can give you the authority, because you can't install on these machines by default. You can't install software. But if we give you the authority to install that through publishing it or assigning that software to you in your OU, then you go to add and remove program or add programs, and you can install Wireshark. You can install Wireshark, kind of. The Windows 7 one doesn't work exactly right, but you can install Wireshark. There are some other things you can install because you've been given the authority to do that within your OU. I gave one time to the students Mr. Loomis wanted to put in, so I put it in. I can't install it. Oh yeah, I forgot to put it in the faculty OU. Oh yeah, well, what do the administrators need the Wireshark for? Only thing they can do is get in trouble with it, right? Cause problems with it. So we don't give it to them. Anything that we want to go to everybody, we can put in the domain. Oh, let's say like a proxy server, which you get in Internet Explorer. We put the proxy server as well as the exceptions in because you don't want to use the proxy for everything. You don't want to use the proxy for local ones. Put that in the domain. Somebody needs certain other things, we assign that to the OUs that they're in. But that's in a nutshell what each of these things do. As you go through and configure these labs next week, think about what you can do with these things. Look at what you can do with these things. Active Directory is a great tool. Active Directory is the power of Windows, of management. Yes?
Can Active Directory actually prevent you from using proxy websites?
Yes, kind of.
Because I know that's...
Well, we can kind of, but what we prefer to use is the DNS server to do that.
So that's always the way around the firewall.
Wow. It's kind of a way around the firewall. Can we prohibit that? Sure. Can we prohibit you from going to certain places? Absolutely. The proxy server has a list of prohibited sites. It's very difficult to keep track of all of the open proxy servers. Why you would want to use them, I have no clue. I've tried them. They're very, very slow and really miserable to use. I know. I had a guy a few years ago failed a routers class because he spent at least half of the routers class trying to find an open proxy. And every time he found one, I just go look at where he'd been and just go put it in the list of prohibited websites in the proxy. And then he spent the next class, half of the class period. That's why he never got his labs done. And he got to take routers twice. There's lots of things you can do. We'll look at proxies in more detail in the security class. The reason we use a proxy server goes back to when we had a very, very slow connection. If you really want to do some effective filtering, I think effective filtering, use OpenDNS as your DNS server. It will save you from yourself on occasion. Like phishing sites, they keep those up to date really. You can't list everything that's bad. If you have open source software, you got a lot of people working on it, you can get more stuff that's bad. But we can send those things, we can manage those things with Active Directory. We can install software with Active Directory. We can either put it directly on the computer, Microsoft Office, everybody's going to get it. We might want to put it on all the computers. We can do that with Active Directory. If we want to give you the authority to install Wireshark, we can put that piece of software in the Add Programs or in the Programs folder and allow you to install it on the local machine because the administrator is actually the one that's giving you the authority to do that when we put the software in.
I've been on my computer, but I can't use it legally.
Can't use what?
Wireshark.
Why not?
Yeah, there's some programs we're not supposed to use because it's through Cox, our internet provider.
Oh, through Cox. That's what he said. But he said that's what somebody told me.
It would be considered hacking.
And no. Observing is legal. When you step over the line into going into somebody else's property, that's when you broke the law. I think what Cox doesn't want you to use is port scanners, the Nmaps of the world. If you run Wireshark on your laptop, your desktop, your Anytop, what are you going to see?
Only your network.
Only your network. Yeah. So why would Cox care if you're looking at your own network? What they do care about if you start doing port scans on their network.
But you can use Wireshark to get their network.
Now you can't. Give it a shot. No, you can't. You can see as far as your network.
To your gateway.
To your gateway. What traffic is going through your gateway. By the way, what traffic can you see? Since you're on the switch, little networking lesson here. What traffic can you see since you're on the switch? You can see the broadcast traffic and all the traffic that goes to you. You can't see other people's traffic because you're on the switch.
Unless you're the gateway.
Unless you're the gateway, unless you become a man in the middle. Yeah. Then you can see everything. But why would they care if you're running a man in the middle on your network?
I've actually found, on my side anyway, I found their gateway.
Found their gateway, yeah. Well, that's pretty easy. Just look at your default gateway.
But I found their actual router.
Yeah, sure. It's right there. It's right there in your router. It says whatever the address is. It's the default gateway. You got to know what it is.
I did a trace route, and it led me right through their services.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. That's what trace route does.
And then I started pinging them on their network.
I don't care. Ping doesn't really take a whole lot.
Like, they have some measures against that.
Yeah. They do. Actually, they do.
Yeah, most of them, they have...
Actually, on my neighborhood, they don't allow trace anymore. They can turn all that stuff off if they want to. If it gets too busy, they just turn it off. That's easy. The routers just don't respond to you.
I didn't do anything.
It's up to you. No. So the forest we talked about, the highest level. When you initially install Active Directory, it'll be a new domain in a new forest. If somebody wants to join your forest, you can create contiguous or discontiguous domains. In order to do that, DNS got to be right. DNS, again, if DNS isn't right, ain't going to work. The forest functional level, and I think that the default is still Windows 2000, 2003, 2008. Nothing was added in the 2008 functional level. It doesn't do you any good to pick that. The only thing it does is say only server 2008 machines can be in there. So if you have a 2008 functional level, you can't have any server 2003s. 2003 functional level has the same capabilities as 2008, except you could have 2003 and 2008 servers. 2000 native, you can have Windows 2000 servers, Windows 2003 servers, Server 2008. So the forest functional level does some restriction, gives you some advantage, and they're going to have you do that. Look and see what happens. Doesn't do you any good. Doesn't hurt anything here because we're using all 2008 servers. But it doesn't do you any good. You get no advantage by using the 2008 functional level. That may change, but it hasn't changed yet. The tree, one or more domains that are in a common relationship. Contiguous trees, discontiguous trees, contiguous trees have part of the name is the same in all of them. Microsoft.com, ecpivab.edu. Supercorp.net, that's Microsoft, the one that they love to use. It's called supercorp.net. Domains in a tree typically have a hierarchical structure. Kerberos, transitive trust relationships. These are some words that they love you to know. Kerberos, of course, you've already heard that, but transitive trust relationship, two-way trust. A transitive trust means that if A trusts B and B trusts C, then A trusts C. Windows 2000, 2003, and 2008 are transitive trusts. Windows NT 4.0 are non-transitive trusts. A trusts B, B trusts C, A does not trust C. These things within the trees, the domains within the forest all have two-way transitive trusts, which means that if I make the Microsoft.com domain and the ECPI-VAB edu or ECPI-VAB edu domain, they trust each other. What that trust does for you is once the trust is established, you can go into an object, right-click, and you can go to the, if you're in the ECPI, you can go to the Microsoft and give Joe Schmo access to a file. Doesn't mean that Joe Schmo can have any access to your network. And I think that kind of gets people a little excited when we talk about the trust is there. Well, the trust is there. What that does is allow you to give somebody access. They don't get access just because there's a trust. You can give them access. Transitive trust, A and B have a trust. B and C have a trust. A and C have a trust. A trusts B, B trusts C, then A trusts C. Trusted domain, granted access to resources. All those things that I talked about, we're coming up with the bullets here, huh? Trusting domain is the one that granting access, like he's a trusting individual, he trusts everybody. The trusting domain trusts somebody else. If, by the way, these things are not in the same forest that have the trusts automatically created, you can do manual trusts. You can do forest trusts where one forest trusts another, as long as you're at least at the Windows 2003 functional level. That's the first place you can do a forest trust. But you can do that. So that if you have these two companies that merge, HP and Compaq, and we want to be able to share resources, and they're two different forests. We said that they're using Windows. They're using two different forests. And we don't want to just jump right in with both feet and try to put everybody in a common forest. We can establish trust so that they can share resources. It's there. It is there by default within a forest. You can create it between forests. All domains within a single tree share the same schema. All domains within a single, this should say forest, share a common schema. One of the things that's common in a forest is schema. They all share the same global catalog. They all share the same schema. The schema is what objects are available. The object types can be stored within Active Directory. All domains in a tree share the same global catalog and portion of their namespace. All domains in a forest share the same global catalog. Because, go back to the earlier slides, when was the global catalog created? First server in the forest, first server in the domain. It's not created by default on any other servers. You have to go configure that to make it available. Domain logical partition, primary container within Active Directory, the basic functions to provide a partition to house objects that we're going to manage together. Establish a set of information to be replicated and expedite management of those objects. And within the domain, we're going to have organizational units in order to further manage those things. And from domain to OU, we have inheritance, unless we turn it off. You can set it up so that inheritance doesn't happen. An example of that would be in our domain. We have an OU called servers. We don't necessarily want the servers to get all of the policies that go to all the other OUs. You might not want them, for instance, to do an automatic reboot every time Microsoft does an update. So you'll block inheritance of the policies that you don't want to go in there. You also, as the administrator, have the ability to say, oh no, you can't block it. You can create a no override. No override is the old term, but you can configure a policy so that whoever is managing the OU can't block that policy. So other ways to do those. Functional levels, domain functional levels. When we talk about functional levels, we have domain functional levels and we have force functional levels. If we raised all of the domains to a Windows Server 2003 functional level, then we can raise the force functional level. All the domains have to be at a common functional level in order for the domain to be changed. We're then going to have you manage domains, OUs. We've kind of talked about those. And all of these things are not really very difficult to create. Right-click, new OU. Right-click, new user object. One of the things that they do recommend is that you don't put any users in your root domain or in your root, well, in the root of the domain. Create OUs. Put all your users in OUs. Gives you more granularity. There's a good term that we use a lot lately, right? Gives us more control of individuals when we do those things. Can be nested within OUs. The best practices, and this is 10 or fewer, has been there forever. I had a student come back one time and said, oh, we put like 20 OUs nested deep. Generally, when you do these things horizontally, horizontal is going to be more efficient than drilling down deep for OUs. Unless you have a lot, I don't know that you're really going to notice the difference. The guy came back, he worked at, I think it was at Lewis Gale, said they did one that was 15 OUs deep. So yes, they do go that deep. So they didn't really notice any difference in efficiency of Active Directory. A site, here we get a subnet again, or a supernet. A site is a container within Active Directory. A site is, their words, I think still their words, well-connected. Well-connected generally meaning LAN speed. What a site does, and by the way, by default there's one site and everybody's in it. What a site does is tell you where to look for an authenticating server. Where are you going to log on? Where's the domain controller that you're looking for? It's based on the subnets that are defined in the site. Or supernets. In here, we have 10.60.211, 10.60.208, 10.60.201, 10.60.61, 10.60.60, and some other ones. So we can quote supernet, which really we can use a Class B subnet. We can just say, hey, Roanoke is 10.60, 255.255.0.0. So that any of the 10.60 addresses looks for an authenticating server in Roanoke. Another story that you may or may not have heard. We had an instructor here who got a really good job when he left, who used to work Boeing, I think, Seattle. So they would go in the mornings. This was during the NT4. They had primary domain controllers, backup domain controllers. Backup domain controllers for authentication. That's what your other servers are, multi-master replication. Review those terms. But since some people would get logged on really quickly in the morning, and some people would just wait and wait and wait. What they found out was that the people that were getting logged on immediately were getting authenticated by the primary domain controller. The other ones that were waiting and waiting and waiting were getting authenticated by the backup domain controller, which happened to be located in Bombay, India. Wow. You want to authenticate at your site. You don't want to authenticate across a WAN. So that's my site story. That's the importance of sites. Is it going to be a big deal? Well, what we're going to configure now, because they're going to have us do a single site, single domain to get the basics of Active Directory. ECPI, single domain, multiple sites. Is site definition a big deal? What if we were trying to authenticate, you were trying to authenticate to a server, let's say in Greenville, South Carolina? Could that slow you down? What happens if the WAN connection goes down? You just lost everything. You're not authenticated anymore because you can't get the information. So that's sites. That's my site story, and hopefully make some sense as to why you need to configure those things in a larger. If you got a single location, if Roanoke were in its own forest, its own domain, its own everything, the default first site, which is the name of it, is all we need because everything's here in the building. When we become a child domain of Virginia Beach and have all of that capability, and then we got the one server up there, we don't really want to authenticate to the server in Virginia Beach. Go across the WAN. We also have some other DNS configurations here that server doesn't know about, so there are some resources that you may not be able to get to because you can't find them. Link to IP addresses, functions based on the connectivity and replication functions. We'll talk about some other things here that sites do. One of the things that sites do, we talked about replication. We have 2 domain controllers here and 1 domain controller in Virginia Beach, and they have a bunch of domain controllers, and all of the other satellites of ECPI have domain controllers. What we would like to do instead of creating a massive replication topology is to make it clean. And we would maybe designate 1 server in Roanoke, and some sites have more than 1 server. 1 server in Roanoke to talk to Virginia Beach. And then when it gets the information, it tells all of its Roanoke friends. And 1 server in Greenville to talk to Virginia Beach, and when it gets its information, it tells all of its Greenville friends. And that's what we do. Those are called bridgehead servers. Communicate from site to site. So there are lots of things. I'm guessing them, huh? Bridgehead server, designated to have a role of exchanging replication information, 1 per site, with somebody else. Inside the site, it's going to be really quick because it's on a local area network. Across site to site, generally going to be on a WAN, can be a fast WAN, can be a slow WAN. What you don't want to do is tie up all your internet capability with replication because it can get big. It's not all the time, but it can be. Rules, keep it as simple as possible. Rules for Active Directory. You set it up to make it efficient for you to manage your network. It does not have to replicate the organizational structure. It may, the administrative organizational structure that you see, the tree that here's the president and you got this vice president, that vice president, and whatever vice president, may or may not look like that. Active Directory structure is your structure, not their structure. It may look that way, it may not. But use the OUs this has to reflect the organizational structure. Use the OUs to reflect the way that you're going to manage your users. Does ours reflect that? Yeah, it kind of sort of does. We have a student OU, we have a faculty OU, we have an admin OU, we have a continuing ed OU, we have a disabled accounts OU. All sorts of different things you can do with OUs. Set it up to where you can manage your structure, your network. Multiple trees and forests only as necessary. They do recommend, and when I do Active Directory, I like to do the one that they don't recommend because it's the most difficult one to manage, which is exactly what we have in this one. We have a root domain with child domains in it. Not really recommended unless you need separate security policies. And we all have separate security policies. I have no idea what everybody else's password requirements are. I know what ours are. I know that a bunch of them don't have a complexity requirement because some people from other places have tried to get in here, get accounts in here or whatever else, and like, I can't set my password. Well, yeah, complex passwords. Nothing really big about it, but what it does is when you guys try to hack each other, it makes the passwords more difficult to get to find, to crack. Use sites for multiple IP subnets and multiple geographic locations. Sites should be used if we have a wide area network between these locations. Trust between forests, external trust, I've talked about that. That was the Compaq and the HP merged, and now we've got these two separate forces sitting out there. We can create an external trust. Guess what's going to be a really big deal here? A 3-letter abbreviation is going to be a really big deal. You got to guess. DNS. If you can't find that server that's got that trust, you got no trust. If you try to create a forest trust and it comes out as a realm trust, say, I better look at DNS. Because it'll try to create a realm trust if it can't do a forest trust. Realm trust, you have realm trust with Linux, with a Linux realm. One way access between a Windows Server domain within a forest and a return of a Unix or Linux server. So realm trust, we can create trusts. They actually made some semblance of effort to try to work better with Linux. Shortcut trusts, these are ones if we had really huge, let's see if they got a picture here, they don't, structures. And we're at the bottom and we have, child domain after child domain after child domain. And we're trying to get to the other side of maybe a non-contiguous tree that has child domain after child domain after child domain. So I'm in child domain 5. When I try to authenticate to child domain other domain 5, it goes to child domain 4, to child domain 3, to child domain 2, to child domain 1, to my domain, to the other domain, because I have trust, to child domain 1, other 1, other 2, other 3, other 4, and then I finally get to other 5. What a shortcut trust does is say, just go there. It creates it for you. That's something that won't be set up by default. You have to create the shortcut trust. What it does is shortcut all of the authentication domain to domain as you go through those things. Creating accounts when Active Directory is not installed, local users and computers, snap-in is going to be there. It's already there in the computer management. Make users and groups, and you're going to have to make local users and groups next week and do some stuff with them. In your print world, so you might as well learn how to do the print world. Local user account that is not on a domain controller, see the text for steps, and that's just right-click new. Those are local users stored in the SAM on the local machine. Server, workstation, doesn't matter. Still stored in the registry in the Security Accounts Manager. When you install Active Directory, local users become obsolete. There are no local users on a domain controller, on a server that has Active Directory on it. There are only domain accounts. And if you create a user on one domain controller, the same user is on all domain controllers. So when you create this, there are no local accounts. Now there is what's called a domain local group, which becomes the equivalent of local groups that you give access to resources. We'll do that in permissions, but Active Directory, domain controller only has domain accounts on it. Local users and computers, you make your own MMC snap-in. You guys know how to do that. Username, full name, what the minimum that you can put in here is a username. And the servers are all configured to require complex passwords. You can change the policy in the local security manager if you want to. And the default is user must change password and next logon. If you don't want that to happen, uncheck it. If you want that to happen, leave it checked. Which means that you can set it here. And this is one of the favorite questions is, how do you ensure that only the user knows their password? Other than taking the stickies off of their monitor. You require the user to change the password. Initially, when you started here, if you can remember back to then, you started up the server and you logged in with capital P password 1, I'll bet you. And what was the next thing you had to do? Change password. User must change the password to next logon. And then you had these people who had never logged on to a computer that had a real difficult time doing that, right? Because it had to be a complex password. What's complexity? Uppercase letter, 4 things on a keyboard, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters. You could have 3 of the 4 for complexity in Microsoft. So what do you tell those? Put a capital letter, small letter, and a number. Okay, now they can get in. Capital P password 1 is a complex password. It's not a good password, but it's complex. Meets those requirements. Active Directory users and computers, and when you install Active Directory, all this stuff's going to be installed for you. It's going to be in your administrative tools. You don't have to go back and create the MMC, although you may want to create an MMC that's got all of the snap-ins that you are going to use in your management. Users and computers, it's the same thing. Right-click on the domain to create OUs, right-click on the OU to create new users and new groups. Users and groups looks a little bit different, and one of the things, please note, look at the properties of a user before you install Active Directory, the things that can be configured, and look at the properties of a user after you install Active Directory, the things that can be configured. It's really, hopefully revealing, but there's a lot of difference between what you can configure and what you can't. This is what the new object user looks a little bit different. An Active Directory, still the same stuff. And when you go next, it's going to have all the passwords. Set the password, user must change, and all the other stuff. The properties of, and just poke around in here. And if you install Exchange Server, you get 3 more tabs. Active Directory is searchable. There are people that, and there are scripts that I'm sure that are available. I have never actually gone to look for one. You could actually use this as an internal phone directory if you are disciplined in your approach to creating the objects. That you have the username, that you have the phone number, everything in a specific format, that you have the office number that they're at, you have their phone number, their name, whatever else that you would want to have searchable or create in there. So it is a searchable database that you can find those things. One of the things that they like to say that, oh, let's say that you're forming a carpool. Yeah, we're going to do that. And you want it, and it might actually happen. And you want to get users by zip code. If you've got that in there, you could find all the users in a particular zip code and say, hey, you guys may want to consider carpooling. Or here are possibilities for whatever that you're going to do. So it is searchable. It can be used for things other than authenticating, but that's its primary function in life. Disabling, enabling, renaming, they're going to have you do that, so I'm not going to do that. Yeah, that's disable account. Right-click, disable. You do it. Locked out, you do it too, but you do it by missing your password so many times. After we configured the security policy, which we looked at in Windows 7, it said, if you missed your password 3 times within 15 minutes, lock the account for 15 minutes. Lockout and disabled are different. If we had an account locked, if you go into the properties of account, the account lock will have a checkbox in it. You uncheck it, and then they can get back in. You can configure lockouts to be a certain number of minutes or until they come see you. SYNCLANT Fleet, where we had secret information on our computers. If I missed my username, it was either 2 or 3 times, I don't remember what it was, my password 2 or 3 times, I had to go present myself to IT and say, please reset my account. Wasn't any calling them. Wasn't any waiting 15 minutes where you were locked out until you went and said, please reset me. Got to do that. You have to identify yourself. Otherwise, James trying to hack my account, he just keeps calling up and saying, I missed my password again. Missed my password again. Missed my password again. It's the dark dawn. Yeah. Disabling, enabling, and renaming accounts. I think one of the points here is, let's go back and say we have this user who is, let's say the director of education at a college. And that user would have permissions to use certain resources. And let's say that they got a brand new job making $150,000 a year and decided that they would take it. and they left. You've got two options. You can delete the account, or you can disable the account. If they got a lot of stuff, a lot of permissions to a lot of resources, disable the account. Whenever the new director of education gets hired, rename the account, because the account is controlled based on the SID, the security identifier. The name is meaningless, except for logging in purposes, the stuff that you type on the keyboard. Rename the account, give them a new home directory, and you don't have to do anything else. They'll then get all the resources that the other user has. But it uses the security ID in order to do that. Moving an account. OUs, by the way, and you probably can't see it here, but when you look at yours, you have folders, the built-in for backward compatibility. OUs kind of have a little book on the folder. That is an organizational unit. If you want to move an account from one OU to the other, you go in and right-click the account, move, and then point to the OU that you want it to go to. If you need to move them around, that one is not very difficult to do. This is the user must change password, unlock the user's account, and then the password that you're going to put in. Again, when you create these things, the servers by default require complex passwords. I found a capital P password one works really well for doing labs. You can't look up, and you probably have heard, you've seen, heard, or thought, people say, what's my password? I don't know. Well, tell me what my password is. You can't do it. You can reset the password, but you cannot read the password. Unlock the user's account. User must change password next log on, and that's another one. Right-click, reset password. And then you pick, and we use this really clever capital P password one for that too, and then require the user to change the password at log on so that they have to do that. Deleting an account, you can do it. The globally unique identifier is also deleted, will not be reused if you create another account using that name. So if you have a problem with the user and you delete the account, if we delete James Foster's account, and then we make another one, exactly the same username, different account. Got a different identifier. He won't have the home directory that he had unless we give that new user that home directory. He won't have access to any of the resources that he had. Deleting accounts only if you never expect to use that user account again. Disable them, and you should disable them. You should check every once in a while to see how long it's been since people logged in. What we kind of do around here is every once in a while run at the command line a query to see who hasn't logged in maybe 180 days. If they haven't logged in 180 days, probably not here anymore. Does everybody check out with you all the time? Nope. Check it out, because each of those user accounts that's sitting out there can be a threat to your network. But check those. Deleting accounts you may or may not. Security group management, it's just like the groups that we've been making. Security of groups is where we group users together to give them access to the same resources. We have this really big group called students. And we give students access to certain resources, like student apps. When your account gets made, you get automatically added to that group. So it's not like you have to do that manually. Do that all in script. Group accounts with similar characteristics together. A security group can be given permissions, can give access to resources. The other group type is, and I don't think they mentioned it in this chapter, is a distribution group. A distribution group is only used to send emails to a group of users. You can email activate a security group. You can give a security group an email account, still give them access to resources as well as use them as a security group. Scope of influence, or scope, the reach for gaining access to resources in Active Directory. The scopes, group types and group scopes. The scopes are local, domain local, global, and universal. Local and domain local, very similar. Local is on a non-Active Directory computer, a non-domain controller. You have local groups. Domain local only on domain controllers. Global group and universal groups. Global groups get users. The way permissions are supposed to work, and when you take Microsoft tests, the way you answer their questions, the way permissions work is users, I'll address universal here in just a second. Users go into global groups. Global groups go into local groups or domain local groups. And local groups or domain local groups get access to resources. Right-click the printer. Who can print to the printer? Oh, let's put in the students security group. Can print to the library printer instead of everyone. A little bit more restrictive. And now we don't want Stephen to print anymore. What do? We just take him out of the group. But now Stephen's been a good guy, so we want to print again, we put him back in the group. An easy way to manage that. Universal groups are for instances where you have multiple domains. Universal groups allow access to resources from users in multiple domains, access to resources in multiple domains. I guess a couple of things when I'm talking about multiple domains that I failed to say here is global groups can only have users from your own domain. For instance, if I have a global group that have users in it and I got shot and it was like 3 days later that I realized what happened, the administrator from Virginia Beach came down, and I have a global group that put you guys into, not anymore, I used to give you access to the website so that you can get onto the virtual machines. Pretty handy to do if we're going to expect you to use the virtual machines. Global group, no problem, put all you guys in it, no sweat. Virginia Beach comes down, wants to be in our global group, on our global group. Go to add him to the global group. I'll see a user. He said, I know how to do that. He couldn't do it either. He's in a different domain. You can't add users from other domains to your global groups. You can add them to your local groups or to your domain local groups can have a user or a group from any domain as long as you have the trust. Universal groups are designed to put the users directly in from multiple domains into those groups and to give them access to resources in multiple domains. That's what those things are really set up for. Security groups, access to resources, standalone server, or in Active Directory distribution groups, they do use it. Used for emails or telephone lines. Distribution groups do not have a SID. They don't have a security identifier. They cannot be given access to resources. Right-click, give a distribution group permission to read a file, can't do it. Use a printer, can't do it. It just won't be there. Local security groups manage resources in standalone computers. Domain local groups manage resources on domain controllers. Create using the local MMC snap-in, and you'll do those. Domain local security group used when Active Directory is not available. That's not always the case. What if Jason wanted to give everybody in the domain, and he had the authority to do it. He was an administrator on this workstation. And he wanted to give everybody in the domain, all the students in the domain, access to something there. Something really cool. He can make a local group on that workstation. He can't make a domain local group because it's not a domain controller. He can make a local group and add the global group that has all the students in it to that local group, and then they have access to the resources. You get access to the virtual machines, and those who aren't here don't get access to the virtual machines simply by giving you group membership and taking group membership away. You don't see, I don't think you see anyway, all of the machines in there. I got 3 pages worth at 50 per page. So that means there's over 100, there's not 150, but there's over 100 virtual machines there right now. What we do is create groups, and then we create folders for like day classes, night classes, Linux classes, lab classes. The reason you see the lab classes is because there's so many of you, and I have a lab classes area, and whatever classes. Actually, Mr. Matthews has got computer apps classes doing it on a virtual machine, doing Microsoft Office on a virtual machine. Put them in because we really don't want to confuse the MAs with all these machines. So we only give them permissions to see the stuff that's in those folders. We do that with security groups. If we want to give you more, we'll put you in a different security group. When we give you less, we'll take you out of some security groups when you do those things. Manage resources in the domain. Give global groups from the same and other domains access to these resources. The local groups. The local group can have users or groups, global groups, from any domain in them. So we can give access to resources. The scope of a domain local group, domain in which the group exists, can convert local groups to universal groups. And I think they probably have a table. If not, there's one on the internet which groups can be converted. If you have a local group and you want to convert it to a global group, you can convert it. Now that's one of those things, right-click convert. Access control lists, the security descriptors, the privileges that have been set up for a particular group. We have the access control list is, we're going to give you access to resources. The access control entries, ACE, are the users that we put in that list, the group or whatever permissions we're giving. Global security counts from a single domain, same things that we said. Also be set up as a member of a domain local group in the same or another domain. Can be added to a local group in its own domain or in another domain. Users and global groups from any domain can be added to a local group or a domain local group, as long as a trust exists. Broader scope than the domain local groups. Can be nested. The problem with nesting groups is if you delete the parent, you just deleted all the other stuff. So be careful of actually you deleted the permissions, you didn't delete the group. Global groups, budget, finance managers, who goes where. Well, this would be a nested sort of arrangement. How much permission do you get? It's there. I don't know a lot of people that are using it. You may find it useful. I think the hazard is you delete the wrong group and you just wipe out your whole permission structure. And as you're building these things, because you're probably not going to be doing everything in 15 minutes, it's going to be over the course of time, probably just as easy to put those groups in that get access to those. Universal groups span domains and trees. Multiple users from multiple domains, access to multiple resources in multiple domains. Domains and trees include user accounts from any domain, global groups from any domain, universal groups from any domain, and can get access to resources in any domain. It can be added in any domain. Help simplify, plan and use, and I like to see the text, right? This is kind of the overlap picture of what we're going to have here. Global exec group goes into the universal group with access to resources in all three domains. And this would be managers. You might want to put managers over, supervisors of some sort in those so that they can get access in all of the domains. Properties, double click on the group and the local users, and the Active Directory, use the users and computers to do Active Directory, local users and groups to manage in a non-Active Directory environment. Take a look at those when you go. General members, member of, managed by are going to be the tabs that are there. You can add users to a domain or you can add a domain to users. You can add them either way, depending on where you are. Security groups and user accounts enabled in an organization to delegate authority over objects Delegation of authority, the easiest one is you have 8,000 users and you want your work group managers to reset passwords. You can delegate the authority to do that. Right-click Delegation Wizard, go through that. Keep in mind, please, that when you do that, once you delegate it, there's no way to undelegate it unless you go to those individual objects. I think that that's a great place to use groups. Make yourself in that OU a reset passwords group. Delegate the authority to reset passwords to that group. We want James and Trevor to be able to reset passwords. We put them in the group. Trevor gets transferred to another organization. We take him out of the group. We put Jason in the group. Now James and Jason have the authority to reset passwords. If we hadn't done that, when Trevor got transferred, we have to go into his user object and take those delegations out. And trust me, it's kind of a pain. Much easier to use groups to do that. It took me a long time to learn that, by the way. Did it the hard way for a long time. User profiles, we've talked about those. Local, automatically generated on the local computer. And I'm still not a huge fan of profiles, but that's just me. If you have Active Directory, you have the ability to use roaming profiles, which might be convenient for administrators so that they get a common desktop whenever they go to troubleshoot remote computers. That's one instance when it might be there. You have to go configure roaming profiles. You can configure profiles in the Active Directory user object. Take a look at that. Find that. How can you do that? You can hard code it in there. Advantage roaming profile each time the user account is logged on. Keep in mind and take a look at your profile sometime on your local computer here. And how big is it? How fast does it grow? I had one here for a while, and you've heard this before, but when it started taking 5 minutes to log on to the network, I gave it up. Desktop just wasn't that important to me. Again, it may be something that you want to do, but they will grow. Mandatory user profile, rename into user.dat into user.man. What it does is it allows you to make changes on the desktop, but doesn't save them. What it essentially does is make the into user.dat file, by renaming it man, a read-only file, so that you can't make changes to it. The next time you log in, you're going to get the same profile that you had before. Restart capability, the new stuff, the restart that capability, restart Active Directory. This can be handy for recovering or troubleshooting when you have to take it offline and restart it. Read-only domain controller is something to know about when you take the test, because I'm sure they want you to know about that. It's something that's one of the pride and joys. Read-only domain controller is designed to be deployed to a remote site that doesn't have a network administrator, where you don't want people making changes to Active Directory, or where you have a domain controller that might be stolen. Once that happens, if you have it designated as a read-only domain controller, if it gets stolen and you take it out of Active Directory, you can force all the users that were on that domain controller, all the user account passwords, to be reset when you take it out. There are a couple of advantages. Disadvantages, it's new. It's kind of like we've come full circle. I told you about the backup domain controllers at the first. We've kind of gone to that, except there's a lot more management of this. Auditing improvements, multiple password and account lockout policies in a single domain. This is one, and I said earlier, the domain one before this, before Windows Server 2008, one security policy per domain. Now you can have multiples. You can actually put a security policy and have it enforced on an OU. Remember a few weeks ago when you had to reset your password all of a sudden for no apparent reason?
Yeah.
What happened? Somebody changed the domain security policy. Set back to the default, 43 days, 42 days. Did some troubleshooting on that. Go into the analysis tools and say, golly, this policy says 180 days, but The actual content says I got to reset it every 42 days. Well, there was a policy, a domain policy, that said 6 months, da-da-da-da-da-da. It's not enforced. Only the domain security policy is enforced. Finally looked at the domain security policy and golly, it's the default. Change the domain security policy and now you get your 6 months back, right? You can, but again, this is, you'd have to look up the process. I don't have it off the top of my head. This is not really an inconsequential task to do this. It can be done, but it takes some effort in order to do that. Active Directory, lightweight directory services role, they talked about that early on, like Chapter 1, some of the things that are available there. What that's really designed for is to manage access to applications on the server. Stop Active Directory without taking down the computer. The general steps are there. Read-only, talked about those already when we did the bullets, can function as a key distribution center. Key distribution center for Kerberos authentication. KDC, Key Distribution Center, is part of the authentication process, for the Kerberos authentication process. Better security at branch locations, the remote locations, somebody don't know what they're doing, or it might get stolen, bad security, those kinds of things is where you would want one of those. Can be configured as a DNS server. Audit trail. All these improvements, you don't know that they're improvements because you don't know what it was before, but auditing is something that has to be turned on and then configured so that you know what happens on the server. Do that. Goes back to payroll. Somebody breaks into the payroll, and so I said, what did they do? Somebody just did that, actually. Broke in, gave themselves a pay raise, and it worked so good they broke in, gave themselves a pay raise again. But they were having so much fun that they made the CEO have a pay of $1. That's when they got caught. But since auditing wasn't configured correctly, I don't know who did it. Actually got a pretty good idea. The guy got all the pay raises. But auditing, who tried to do stuff and was unsuccessful and who actually succeeded in doing something. You may want to know both. You may only want to know about the failures. You may want to know about the successes. You may want to know about the successes and the failures. Multiple password and account lockout policies in a single domain. We've talked about that, associated with a security group, user, or OU. Takes some effort to do that, trust me. Unless you got a really good reason to do it, you're not going to do it, I don't think. Password settings container contains the password settings for the objects, represents a unique set of password policies, so you have to have unique policies for these things. They can do that. Lightweight targeted servers that manage user applications, skeletal version of skeletal version of Active Directory domain services. It can't be used to make users and manage Active Directory. It's used to manage applications. And a lot of these things, yes, they're really good improvements. They're for really big domains. A domain our size, do we need all this stuff? No. Do we need some of this stuff? Yeah. Makes stuff a lot easier. Makes things a lot easier. Deploying software makes it a lot easier. Central management makes it a lot easier. Putting people in classrooms makes it a lot easier because you can log on to any machine as long as you have the correct credentials. Lots of things it makes easier. Is it hard to manage? No. As long as you got DNS configured correctly. I won't give up on that one. Because when it doesn't work, guess what the first question I'm going to ask is, I got a guy's an independent study doing Active Directory. Been on a lot of online classes. There's a lot of theory. Started doing these labs, answering all the questions. A lot of theory. I wrote him back, said you can't get it more than a 50 on any lab unless you do the activities. His first one was to join it to the domain. He got lucky. He used the NetBIOS name for the domain. The next time he had to use the fully qualified domain name. He says, can't find domain controller. What am I doing wrong? I've done all this stuff. I looked at it, sent a note. They said the short answer is DNS is configured wrong. Watch the 3 videos. And I'll put the DNS video. Watch the videos. Not that I'm a great instructor, but I think it goes through what you can do. There's a couple ways to do it. If you have a DNS server, you can use what's called a conditional forwarder. We'll get to those. With some of this stuff, the cart gets before the horse. You have to, because you can't do everything at once. A lot of the things that we're going to go into more depth in infrastructure, we have to use in server already a little bit. We have a thing called conditional forwarder, which says that, hey, if I want to find something in ECPI VAB domain that's not listed in a row in OKC, I just make a forwarder to say, hey, for everything that has ECPI VAB, go here. For everything else, go someplace else. Forwarder says that I can't find it, go ask a different DNS server. Conditional forwarder for a narrow set of objects, use this other domain controller. Active Directory snapshots, this is something that's new. NTDS util, Active Directory database, the mounting tool, we can take a snapshot of Active Directory. It's not intended to be used for a restore, but it's intended to be used for comparisons. What's changed? Compare what's in Active Directory after it's restored. See what's there. It is a comparison. Active Directory, the objects, we have forest, domains, OUs, users working our way down. Global catalogs, term that you want to become familiar with. A little bit of information about every object in the forest. All of them have the same database. Multi-master replication, we can make changes on any domain controller. You should have at least 2 of them. Hierarchy, user accounts and profiles. User accounts learn. The thing that I would like to see you become interested in, proficient at, as you go through looking at Active Directory, is policies, not profiles. Profiles, what your desktop looks like. Policies, what you, in a lot of cases, what you can do. Can you log on to a computer? By default, you know, by default, regular users can't log on to can't log on to servers. How can you change that? You could change policy. By default, you have to have a complex password on a server, right? You've seen that, hopefully. How do you change that? Go change the policy. Policy is where you actually control stuff. We want to give only the tech students the ability to install Nmap. I thought I'd get a rise out of trouble with that one. Nmap. How do we do that? Policy. Policy is where the power is. Active Directory is where that starts. You can actually do an awful lot of stuff in Active Directory. Are you going to know how to do all of it when you leave? No. Are you going to have to do all of it in a year? Probably not. 10 years? A lot of it. All of it? Probably not. Are they going to change it? Yeah. Are they going to add to it? Yeah. It's gotten better each time. It's gotten a lot better each time it's been changed. Functional levels, some of the things that you can do. It also changes the scope of some of the groups as you change functional levels too. So you need to, sometimes if things aren't working exactly the way you thought they would based on what you've read, check the functional level, because some of the group scopes do get changed with functional level. Functional levels change. Questions? Comments? I know you want a break. I don't blame you. Let's take a break.